far as we know, we have been told that when the time comes that we will have 3 months' notice. There'll be 1 month's notice and 2 months to get off.
Do you feel any great bitterness about what's happening?
Well, it's only natural I would. Yes, certainly I do, but still, you've got to move with the times, I suppose.
I feel that the whole of this island is not necessary for this project at all.
We had 6 foot of lawn in front of that cottage at one time. It was high up.
Well, what's happened to it all?
Well, it's all got eroded away with the altering of this. The causeway and one thing and another's caused all this erosion, you see.
Our first grandchild was only about 12 months when she came here, and she helped and we started to, you know, clear the block.
In the first place, we are not squatters. We pay, we have a legal agreement, we pay an annual rental, and there may be a few places you could classify as shacks, but there's some very nice places there too.
Garden Island is 60 kilometres south of Perth, and for a lot of people it's been a paradise. For others, pure hell. The early settlers here had a terrible time. It was an inhospitable place in the 1820s, but a century later, and for holiday makers, it was just a dream come true. They had perfect water, so clear, perfect beaches, peace, tranquility. It was just a terrific place to catch some fish and daydream. Then the Navy came, and a lot of those people protested when they were told to pull down their holiday shacks. They watched in horror as the causeway and the bridge went up. You see, this was their playground. It was their piece of paradise, I guess, and they had a lot of fears for its future. That was 10 years ago, and it's a good time now to find out if their fears were justified.
We will do everything possible within the law, within our rights, within our legal rights, to stay there as long as possible.
We had the pick of all these blocks here. It was lovely. We call it paradise. That's what we call it.
Garden Island has a unique place in Australia's history, and one that's been largely forgotten. The first free settlers in the fledgling colony came here. About 200 optimistic Britons arrived here on this site, Cliff Head, Garden Island, lured by Captain James Stirling's belief that an ample supply of artesian water and what he thought was fertile soil would provide them a good living until the allocation of their mainland grants. How wrong they were. Life here in the winter of 1829 was just awful. The weather was atrocious. There were few materials to build adequate shelter from the vicious elements. The soil was so sandy that nothing would grow. The only fresh food were the seals, the fish and the tamar wallabies, and the insects were unrelenting. As the linchpin of a brave new colony, Garden Island was a stunning failure. But it came into its own in the following century. World War I changed the island forever. That's when the Commonwealth first laid its claim, because its strategic value to a defending force was immense. That value wasn't fully realised, however, until World War II, when gun batteries were established to protect the port of Fremantle. For several years, the island bristled with men and guns and machinery. Work stopped as the war receded to the Japanese mainland. The guns were sold for scrap, and the bush slowly took over. A monument on the island remembers the highly secretive Z-Force, the commando unit that took the war overseas and behind enemy lines. It trained here. After the war, Garden Island retained its role as a strategic naval post. It became home to the mothball fleet. Between 1945 and 1957, as many as 11 surplus ships were laid up in the shelter of Careening Bay. In the midst of all this activity, the island became increasingly popular with local holidaymakers who came by boat and built rough shacks to pursue the simple pleasures the island had to offer. All that changed in 1970 when the Commonwealth announced that Careening Bay was to be the site of a naval base. The holiday shacks had to go. Men and machinery moved in to build the base, but not without considering the delicate ecology of the island. It was a task that confronted the Department of Construction, the builders.
essentially the base took #1 preference. Let's face it, function was the most important thing. Now, if where function could be modified slightly to incorporate the environment, yes, well, that was done.
Was there opposition, a lot of opposition originally from the environmental lobby against what you were doing?
No, not a lot, but a lot of noise. You know, there's a big difference there. You had 700,000 couldn't have cared less. Yeah, of the remaining 50,000, 10,000 probably had very strong feelings, and the balance were willing to be convinced, and that was about the rate of it.
So
but those 10,000 made an awful lot of noise.
So how did you solve that problem? Was it a consultative process or a combative process you went through with the environmental?
Consultative all along.
Because people still had their holiday shacks here, didn't they, at that time?
The shacks at the southern end of the island had gone, but the shacks at Herring Bay and the northern end were still there, and they stayed right through until just before the armament depot was built. So,
how did you get rid of those shacks?
We gave the occupants of the houses at least 12 months' notice that they would have to vacate, and they could take anything they wanted of their house off the island. At times we even offered assistance in the removal. But at the end of the 12 months, if anything was left, it would be removed by the construction authority.
Looking at the base today, is it the way the three of you wanted it to be?
It's the dream of Stirling come true as far as we're concerned. We were very careful in the design to try and fit it into the natural landscaping and to destroy as little as possible. We get great joy in seeing the way it has developed, as we'd hoped.
The builders of Stirling are very proud of what they've done here, and so is the Navy. They set out to create a model base in an unspoiled wilderness. Buildings were shaped like the island's sand dunes and coloured to contrast well with the deep greens of the vegetation around them. Accommodation, service and base facilities were separated and spread through a vast parkland studded with gardens of indigenous trees and shrubs. The warships dominate Careening Bay today, but the water beneath them remains unpolluted. Making sure it stays that way is the job of a committee of Navy and civilians. Its chairman is the commanding officer of Stirling.
On that committee, I have representatives from both the Commonwealth Government and the state government, and we meet roughly every 3 months or so and consider various aspects of ecological management of the island and also public access.
Exactly what gives you most pride? What are the things that stand out that the Navy's achieved here environmentally?
Well, the basic objective, of course, in looking after the island in an environmental sense is to retain it in as close a condition as possible to its the original situation, in a pristine condition. And I think if you take a look around the island, you'd hopefully agree that that has in fact been achieved.
"150 years ago, the first Europeans set foot on these beaches. Many others followed, but the rough and wild beauty of the island remained unchanged. The advent of the naval base meant that many areas of the island, especially the fragile ones, became out of reach to visitors. There was some alarm among locals when essential roads and fire breaks were cut, but it wasn't shared by naturalist Bob Goodale.
It's a two-way thing with fire breaks always. I mean, a fire break is a fire break and in fact helps the environment, in that there is a lot more control on the fire if there was one on the island. My views are that any control over a piece of native environment is good if it's left open slather to the general populace, it's very quickly trampled on, fires lit, weeds brought in, you know, and so on, it multiplies. But we need to control and channel people's interest, or channel people's need for the environment or the wildlife, so that they don't damage it.
That was the fate of the well-known Rottnest Island, just 20 kilometres away. Like Garden Island, it was once densely clothed with vegetation. But without the strict controls of Garden Island, it became a different place. Unique species like Calitris, the Rottnest Island pine, almost disappeared.
Native vegetation is remarkably resilient, provided, or resistant to invasion, provided you don't disturb it. Well, Rottnest is a case in point. 66% of the island was covered by Melaleuca, Calitris and acacia woodland. That's at the turn of the century. There are less than 6% of the island is now covered with that sort of vegetation. And Calitris is nearly extinct on the island. Yet here, you've still got quite large expanses of pristine Melaleuca Calitris woodland. And so as a conservation resource, it's invaluable.
So how's the bushland here remained effectively in its virgin state?
Well, it's because of the way it was developed, and partly, I guess, Defence Department involvement or Navy involvement, but also because, of course, it was, I guess, an exclusive holiday resort for some people, and was really only accessible by boat. There was some form of ferry service. So the disturbance was kept to a minimum. People concentrated the development around the coast, and there wasn't a lot of pressure on the vegetation anyway.
How important is it to the fauna of this island, the indigenous fauna of the island, for this bushland to remain effectively untouched?
Well, it's essential because, of course, the flora and the fauna have evolved together, and you start altering components of the vegetation, and of course that's going to then affect some of the animals.
Another casualty of the invasion of the Europeans has been the Tamar wallaby. Once prolific throughout much of the southwest corner of Western Australia, its numbers dwindled drastically. It was almost extinct. A small colony on Garden Island lived on, battling 150 years of ill will and lack of understanding. Today, that colony is thriving, not just thriving, but booming. In the past 10 years, its numbers have grown from around 700 to more than 6,000. The Tamar is one of the smallest species of the wallaby family. It's a nocturnal animal, emerging from the island's dense scrub to graze until dawn. The vast, well-watered lawns of the naval base become their territory in the dark. They're affectionately known here as the Silent Sentinels.
The Navy development has been very sympathetic as far as the native vegetation and its associated fauna is concerned. But if there'd been an unsympathetic development, as happened, for example, at Rottnest, where most of the vegetation was removed, then there could have been problems with the Tamar population.
How healthy are the Tamars compared with, for example, the quokkas on Rottnest Island?
On Rottnest, where there have been major problems associated with human quokka interactions, at some times in the year, 100% of the quokka population are carrying up to, I think, 7 or 9 different serotypes of salmonella. Now, these are things that some of them can be quite nasty. For example, gastroenteritis is caused, of course, by salmonellas, and barley belly, or these sorts of things. Now, that's almost as a result of the degradation of those ecosystems and their ability to get hold of garbage or sewerage, and of course they've got the capacity then to pollute water supplies. There have been tests done of the Tamars on Garden Island, but there have been no isolations of salmonella. And that's a very important point to stress, that that's something that needs to ensure that it doesn't happen, that none of these bacteria are introduced into the ecosystem.
Are you impressed with the way the Navy's handled that?
Yes, the Navy does take all the wet garbage off the island, and they do pay particular attention to the fencing of their sewerage ponds to see that the Tamars can't get access to it.
This is a very clean place. Wet garbage from the base kitchens is chilled and ship's waste incinerated to prevent the breeding of flies and disease. All garbage is removed from the island each day. On the wharf, plug-in facilities provide everything the ships need: power, fresh and salt water, steam, compressed air, fuel, telephone lines and sewage discharge. The service reduces the workload for the ships, but more important, it prevents pollution of the sea around them, a sea renowned for its purity. The causeway is the Navy's link with the mainland. For security reasons, it's not open to the public, except for open days and increasingly popular conducted tours. But people can still come here by boat.
More than 2/3 of the island is declared to be a public access area, and the public are very welcome to come by boat. Many of them do. Some hundreds, in fact, over a long weekend, for example.
Isn't that a bit of a security risk? I mean, you can't control what people are doing all over the island. Are you worried about the possibility of bushfires and things like that?
That's always a risk. There hasn't been a major fire on the island since 1956, and it's something that we're constantly on the lookout for. But our experience has been that those people who do come to the island to visit for recreational purposes by boat behave themselves extremely well and support us in every way in trying to protect the environment.
Herring Bay, on the northwest tip of Garden Island, is a favourite with the boating fraternity. Generations of the same family have been coming here for decades. Former shack owner Jim Green and his mate Ray Reynolds once opposed the Navy's takeover of the island. You know this area very well, of course, and you must keep an eye out on it, I would think, wouldn't you, for people who are doing the wrong thing, perhaps?
Well, the ranger will tell you that this side barbecue does not get vandalised anywhere near as much as the other side does, because there's nobody there watching it. Jim and I are around all the time. People have to come in with a boat, so they have to come past us. Registration numbers on boats. It's very easy for us to track any damages that he's done. We don't set out to be real policemen, but we do appreciate what we've got here, and we're looking after it.
How do you think the Navy's handled its development of Garden Island?
I think we in the Navy have learnt we can live together. There's no need to kick us off this island, because we will look after it as well as they would like to look after it themselves. Not only me and my son and my grandson, we all enjoy this place, so why can't we live together in peace, help each other? And that's the name of the game.
So you're happy, really, with what they've done?
I've got no complaints with what they've done, other than coming here in the first place.
About time they came off?
Right, how's that big fish?
That's
just about right.
All right, can you...
Yes, mate.
Right,
you take it over the table, everybody will love it.
Okay.
You can take the one?
I'll take the empty. You can bring the crabs
Right,
and those
we'll get
nice crayfish of mine.
Okay. We're ready, are we?
Anybody for a small fish, please?
I got that one this morning.
Now, whose crayfish are these? I understand they've got a name on them.
Harry and Charlie and Fred.
They were the ones we got this morning.
The takeover of Garden Island didn't just affect the holidaymakers who lost their shacks. The small centre of Rockingham, only 4 kilometres away, was also in for some fairly big changes. Previously just a lazy holiday town, it's now home for over half of Stirling's personnel.
Well, the change, Niree, has been quite dramatic. At a time when we've generally seen the amount of people from Rockingham working just to our north of Kwinana heavy industry, there's been a reduction there in workforce. We've seen a corresponding growth of population of from some 7,000 to now we've got 34,500.
It's a big jump.
That's all happened in 10 years. The Navy, of course, have added to that number in excess of 1,000. They spend an enormous amount of money in Rockingham each year. In fact, it's somewhere in the order of 13 million. That's, of course, improved the town's economy.
Has it brought any problems to it?
No. I think because of efforts being made by the Navy in particular, also, if I don't mind mentioning, the council and also state government, I think most of the problems that Navy foresaw have been avoided, such as, one example is
putting all naval housing together. That has not happened in Rockingham. The Navy deployment here over the last 10 years has been as close to a success story as you're going to get.
We've got to develop, obviously, and it will create a lot more work for the younger generation.
I think it's made a great deal of difference because it's brought Rockingham alive.
Great, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, no. No, I reckon it'd be good for Rockingham, good for the businesses.
If it wasn't for the Navy, the business down there would have gone broke years ago. So, yeah, it's been beneficial to the community for sure.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Oh, that makes things better around the place. Is the place jumping a bit?
Oh, I think we lost a good picnic area, but I suppose we've got to go somewhere.
The way people talked about it, you thought they were taking the whole of the island up, and they haven't done. But at the same time, I think perhaps there could be more access for people in the area that the Navy hasn't got.
The Navy's very proud of Stirling and likes to show it off. Every year, on Navy Day, it invites the public to see for themselves how the island is faring under Navy management and what goes on there. HMAS Stirling is a fleet base, the only one in Western Australia. 7 warships and 1 submarine operate from here, and the base exists to support them and their crews and provide workshops and maintenance expertise. This open day attracted more than 20,000 people. Some were invited to comment on the management of the base and the island.
I reckon they're doing a damn good job of keeping the base going and at the same time maintaining the island. It's still an island that you could spend time on.
Oh, I think it's an essential facility and progress and things like that. And the Indian Ocean's a big place.
They seem to have done an excellent job from what I can see.
I think it's a credit to them. I just didn't expect it to be so well set out. The gardens, the lawn, everything's green. It looks terrific.
So the HMAS, they've increased population from 700 to 7,000. That's not bad, is it?
It's nice and clean and neat. On the other hand, I would like it to be open to the rest of the public on more than the occasion of being able to come over by boat. I think they should have perhaps more access to it by the public.
The Commonwealth is committed to expanding the base over the next decade to support up to half the Navy's fleet. The strategic need for a major fleet base in the West has been recognised for over 75 years, but the increased technical, logistic and personnel support will do little to change the island.
The island itself won't look much different to what you see now. The naval base, of course, will change. This island is roughly 1,216 hectares in area, and the Navy currently occupies a bit less than a third of it. Now, with the proposed expansion over here, we don't intend to take much more of the island than we currently use. As far as the base is concerned, clearly if the number of ships here will treble, so we plan to build a new 320-metre pier. Obviously, more accommodation for single members will be needed inside the base, and the other major facility that's required is an extended small boats compound.
In some ways, it's a funny kind of relationship, nature and the Navy. On one part of the island, there are noisy men and high-tech weaponry and big machines. On another, whispering forests and impenetrable bush and the delicate creatures who live there. The creatures are vulnerable and often helpless. The men and women who work there are not. But the Navy has taken its protective role very seriously, and every person on this base understands what they have to do to keep this particular piece of paradise pristine.